a lot of you were looking forward to our guest speaker today, but I decided at the last minute I'm going to speak instead. I had Joey up here. I should have, but I was having a conversation. A couple of us, Pastor Lyle and myself, were having a conversation with Joey about religious liberty and so on and so forth, and he mentioned Dr. Gary Wood, his one of his professors there at Andrews University, where he's been for about 20 years now, 19 years. And so I appreciated that. And he said a lot of bad things about him, but he said the grades aren't out yet, so don't repeat those things, he told me. But, and so I had the opportunity to contact and to actually get together and talk to Dr. Gary, which I really enjoyed. And I found an individual who is passionate about the topic of religious liberty and certainly knowledgeable. I mean, he's a political science professor. And I want to mention that he has a wife and 2 daughters, but one of his dear daughters got quite sick. Thursday night they had to go to the emergency room. And so unfortunately for us and for Gary, Dr. Gary, he's up by himself today. But so I'm going to tell you what he's going to talk to you about, okay? Just really briefly. He's going to, so his main topic this morning is the Declaration of Independence. This afternoon, as he'll tell you, he's going to talk about the Constitution. Okay, so he's going to share how passionate the pioneers of the Seventh-day Adventist Church were about the Declaration of Independence. In fact, and I don't mean to take in his, but I'm going to say this anyway. He's going to share with you something I never knew before, and I've studied a lot of Seventh-day Adventist history, that basically faithfulness to, adherence to the Declaration of Independence was once one of our fundamental beliefs. Like if you wanted to be baptized, that was one of them. He's going to share that with you, okay? And he's going to show how that at the same time, the leaders of this country, Jefferson, Madison, were right in harmony with the Seventh-day Adventist belief about the overwhelming importance of the Declaration of Independence and the principles that it's based on. And then he's going to briefly share with you how that today, people in the halls of power, okay, people with power and influence, really do not hold that same view, okay? And thus, the importance of this topic, religious liberty. Thank you so much, Dr. Gary, for coming to share with us. Now, Dr. Gary is, he shared with me, much to my surprise, that he's really not used to speaking in church. Of course, he's used to lecturing, but and he really doesn't use slides. But he has so many quotes that I think between the two of us we decided he should have slides. But it takes a while to get used to that because you gotta. But anyway, he's very passionate about what he's sharing, and I'm so glad to have him here today. May God bless us.
Thank you, Pastor Dan. It's a real privilege to be with you here today. My sermon title is actually very long, didn't get all on there. Liberty, Justice, Wisdom, Rediscovering the Principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Foundations of Religious Liberty. As probably most of you know, this year marks the 250th anniversary of our nation's founding and one of the most important documents ever written, the Declaration of Independence. In the Great Controversy, Ellen G. White referred to the Declaration of Independence, and I quote, as that grand old document which our forefathers set forth as their Bill of Rights. She went on to state that the Declaration of Independence sets forth the great truth that all men are created equal and endowed with inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Defending the right of religious liberty and human rights in general has always been an important part of our Adventist heritage, and Ellen White and the Adventist pioneers correctly recognized that the Declaration provides the definitive statement not only on our nation's founding principles, but on a great truth that can be claimed by all human beings and all nations. This is how Abraham Lincoln described the significance of the Declaration in a letter to H.L. Pierce. All honor to Jefferson, to the man who, in the concrete pressure of a struggle for national independence by a single people, had the coolness, forecast, and capacity to introduce into a merely revolutionary document an abstract truth applicable to all men and all times. Notice that the abstract principles of the Declaration transform what might have been a merely revolutionary document into something much more significant. Alonzo T. Jones, a Seventh-day Adventist minister and religious liberty advocate, shared this view of the American founding. In his 1891 book, The Two Republics, he writes, and I quote, "Then came the American Revolution, establishing for the enlightenment of all nations the new republic." We might see some similarity in A.T. Jones's view to what we read in Deuteronomy 4:6 as our scripture reading. Ancient Israel provided enlightenment for all the nations around it because of the wisdom of its laws. Okay, this is H.E. Jones' view of the Declaration. According to Jones, this revolution, and I quote, did not consist in the establishment of a government independent of Great Britain, in other words, merely a revolutionary document, but in the ideas concerning man and government that were proclaimed and established by it. The ideas proclaimed and established by, quote, this grand revolution were proclaimed in what Jones referred to as that immortal document, the Declaration of Independence. Jones would contend that the national constitution is but the complement of the Declaration, and that the Constitution of the United States, as it stands, as the sole monument of all history representing the principle which Christ established for earthly government, and under it, in liberty, civil and religious, in enlightenment and in progress, this nation has deservedly stood as the beacon of light of the world for more than 100 years. He's writing in the 1890s. Like Lincoln, A.T. Jones believed the Declaration is not only an important document for Americans, but for the world because, in his words, I quote again, it announces the perfect principle of civil government. The American founding was truly a world historical event. This is why, in 1897, the principles of the Declaration were explicitly identified and openly proclaimed as one of the fundamental beliefs of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, as Pastor Dan told you just a little bit. And by the way, I brought the document with me, so this afternoon, if anyone would like to see it and look at it, called them the fundamental principles of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Okay, let's read it. That according to the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these rights is the liberty for everyone to worship God according to the dictates of one's own conscience, without molestation from the government, unless the equal rights of others are encroached upon, that consequently all religious laws on our civil statute books are void, as being not only contrary to the Constitution of the United States in its First Amendment, but contrary to the higher Constitution of the law of God. The abstract principles of the Declaration immediately precipitated a political earthquake unlike any the world had ever seen, particularly with respect to religious liberty. The natural law, natural rights foundations of the Declaration rested on an understanding of religious liberty as a fundamental right, not simply as a matter of tolerance. Thus, from the perspective of the Founding Fathers, even the Toleration Act of 1689, passed by the English Parliament following the Glorious Revolution, and surely one of the great milestones in the long battle for religious liberty, ultimately rested on the flawed foundations of enlightened despotism, rather than the enlightened consent of the governed expressed in the Declaration. It's difficult to overstate the magnitude of the changes wrought by natural rights foundations of religious liberty brought about by the American Revolution. But by way of example, let's turn to a letter written by George Washington on August 18, 1790, to a group of Sabbath keepers from the Hebrew congregation of Newport, Rhode Island. In this remarkable letter, Washington writes, "The citizens of the United States of America have a right to applaud themselves for having given to mankind examples of an enlarged and liberal policy, a policy worthy of imitation. All possess alike liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship. It is now no more that toleration is spoken of as if it was by the indulgence of one class of people that another enjoyed the exercise of their inherent natural rights." Note that religious liberty is an inherent natural right and does not depend on the goodwill or toleration of those in power. George Washington's letter to the Truro Synagogue represents the first time in more than 2,000 years that Jews had been recognized as citizens of any nation. It represented the first time in human history that Jews had been recognized as equal fellow citizens of a non-Jewish polity. Today, however, it is difficult to appreciate the changes that were brought about by the American Revolution, perhaps because we tend to focus on those aspects of society that were not immediately changed during the founding era. Indeed, the founding is often cast in an entirely negative light. To be sure, the American founding was not completed until the Civil War was fought and the subsequent adoption of the Reconstruction Amendments finally brought the Constitution into full consonance with the principles of the Declaration. For those of you who might not be familiar, Reconstruction Amendments, 13th Amendment abolishing slavery, 14th Amendment guaranteeing civil rights for former slaves, and the 15th Amendment guaranteeing the right to vote for African American males. We should note that the Adventist pioneers were well aware of the incomplete nature of the American founding, and between the 1830s and the end of the Civil War in 1865, the nascent Adventist movement proclaimed that slavery was evil embraced the abolitionist movement where the rhetorical weapon of choice against their pro-slavery adversaries was the Declaration of Independence. Our pioneers recognized that slavery was a great moral evil. It violated God's law. It was contrary to the most basic tenets of the Christian faith. And it also violated the Declaration of Independence. Because Southern Christians, beginning in the 1830s, were making sophisticated theological arguments in defense of slavery, Christian abolitionists, including our Adventist pioneers, relied heavily on the Declaration, which very unambiguously proclaims that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with the right to liberty. For these early Adventists, the Declaration of Independence was a consistent representation of God's moral order. Natural law aligns with and provides support for divine law. One of the most important activities of 19th century abolitionists was to petition the government to end slavery. And I wanted to show you an example of such a petition. This petition was written and signed by a group of Adventists in April 1862, about a year into the Civil War, and it is addressed to the President of the United States and to Congress. And the petition read in part, "The undersigned Seventh-day Adventists and others, that our professions of Christianity and boasts of liberty are but a mockery in the sight of nations of the earth and of the God of the universe, so long as we delay practically to recognize the inalienable right of all men to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We therefore urge you, as the executive and representative personifications of our national government, by all the consideration of self-preservation and of allegiance to justice and to God, to abolish by proclamation and without delay the great unnatural crime of slavery, the exhaustless and inveterate source of our national ruin." I hope you all caught the almost mandatory reference to the Declaration. Contrary to what we are often taught, the Civil War was fought to vindicate the principles of the Declaration, and these principles played a pivotal part in the adoption of the Reconstruction Amendments I just mentioned, as is evidenced by the fact that members of the 39th Congress who were working on those amendments frequently expressed the idea that they were completing the American founding by bringing the Constitution into full harmony with the principles of the Declaration. The Declaration continued to play a crucial role in the development of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but I want to shift now from discussing on the important role the Declaration played in our history to providing you with at least a cursory explanation of the core teachings of the Declaration. So you're going to get a little political theory here. Try not to fall asleep. But it's important for understanding our religious liberty and our rights more generally. Right? All Americans are quick to note that they have rights, but few can actually explain why they have rights. Okay, do you just have rights because they were written down in the Constitution? Or were they written down in the Constitution because you have rights as human beings, and all the Constitution can do is recognize and secure those rights, you see. And then if you do, explain how. And this is what the Declaration is meant to do. I'm doing this in such a quick fashion that I wanted to let you know that this afternoon, if anyone is interested, I'd be happy to expand on a variety of troublesome terms and expressions that people sometimes find confusing, the laws of nature and nature's God, self-evident truth, natural rights, pursuit of happiness, state of nature, and anything else you might find confusing about the Declaration and its principles. Let me first note, though, that our pioneers correctly recognized a connection between the Declaration and the Constitution. Alonzo T. Jones, remember that guy we mentioned before, Adventist religious liberty advocate, writing in another book, The Rights of the People, advanced the argument contending, and I quote, that the Constitution originated in the principles of the Declaration of Independence. Way back in the 1850s, one of Adventism's leading pioneers, J.N. Loughborough, acknowledged that the Constitution was professedly based on the Declaration of Independence. Thus, according to Jones and Loughborough, the Constitution was grounded in a doctrine of human equality, which recognized but did not create the natural rights of all human beings. The Constitution did not give people their rights, but it was written and ratified in order to protect the rights that belong to man by nature. This argument was not unique to Jones, and indeed he claimed justifiably that he was simply defending the original intentions of the Founding Fathers. Significantly, most contemporary constitutional scholars would deny this contention. But the evidence that what Jones and Loughborough wrote is true is overwhelming. John Quincy Adams, for those of you that might not know too much about him, he's the son of our second president, John Adams. He was himself the sixth president of the United States. He was the leading anti-slavery politician of the 1830s and 40s, only president who went back to Congress, went back to the House of Representatives after he was president, and there he fought battles, for example, for the right to petition to abolish slavery, which I talked about. And he was much admired by our Adventist pioneers. They were on the same side of many of the most controversial issues of the 1840s. This is how he stated the matter. I've got Jones's quote there, and there's Adams. The Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States are parts of one consistent whole, founded upon one and the same theory of government. The theory of government that Adams was referring to is clearly expressed in these words that I'm going to repeat, but just go a little further in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. This passage expresses the core teaching of the Declaration. Most importantly, it imparts a doctrine based on the rational insight that no man is so far superior to other men as to justify his ruling them without their consent. When the American founders argued that the self-evident truth that all men is created equal, they were drawing conclusions that necessarily follow from a careful reflection on the meaning of human nature. We share a common human nature. Man can be distinguished from the rest of nature by the fact that he forms a middle link in what John Quincy Adams called the great chain of being. In short, human beings as rational animals are endowed by nature with a certain ontological liberty that clearly raises them higher than any beast, but also just as obviously places them lower than God. As Adams points out, man's rational capacity raises us above the rest of the animal creation. And by our reason, we participate in the divine nature itself. Right? We are made in God's image. While the capacity to reason does not manifest itself equally among all men, it is nonetheless a common attribute of humanity, and it allows us to recognize that humans are different from beasts and should be treated differently. For any man that possesses an ordinary capacity for reason can recognize the fundamental difference between a human being on the one hand and a dog, a horse, or a goat on the other. Because humans can understand the difference between men and beasts, they can also understand why it would be wrong for man to rule another man as if he might rule a dog or a goat. I love my dog, but she cannot consent to be governed. Okay? Again, we have this ability to reason, to abstract, to make moral decisions. The beasts don't have that, right? If a coyote kills a lamb, do we put the coyote on trial? Hey, you might as well blame the lamb for tasting good. But human beings, we do hold responsible for their moral actions. Adams also notes that humans are consumed by passions and appetites. In any event, humans is never without some flaws. Indeed, reason and experience teach us that human nature is not perfectible, and it is in reflecting upon our own limited nature that we come to understand that true perfection can exist only in God. Standard theistic definition of God: all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good. Can any human being claim those attributes? Perfect justice, perfect mercy? Okay. And since reasonable men know they're not divine, they also know it would be wrong for a man to rule over other men as if they were a god among mortals. Natural rights are derived from an understanding of common intelligible essence that marks humans as the being in nature whose status is somewhere in between beast and God. Because man is the in-between being, it follows that just government must rest on consent. In the words of Thomas Jefferson, I quote, "The mass of mankind has not been born with saddles on their backs, nor a favored few, booted and spurred, ready to ride them legitimately by the grace of God." Okay, now I'm going to get into something called the social compact. I bring it up because when we look today at alternative interpretations of the Constitution, right, there is a new natural law interpretation of the Constitution called the common good interpretation, put forward by people who don't really like individual rights. And it is this social compact theory that they attack vehemently. So we'll talk about that later. Unaided human reason is sufficient to grasp the truth that there are no humans who bear a mark of superiority that would give them a right to rule despotically over others. Of course, humans are not equal in many important respects. We differ in our physical attributes, creative proclivities, knowledge, wisdom, and in a host of other ways. But even if some people are physically stronger or more intelligent than other people, no one's strength or intelligence is great enough to justify ruling other people without their consent. However, if humans found themselves, let's say, living outside of civil society in a world without government, these rights would not be secure. So the founders, following classical liberal theorists like John Locke, called this theoretical pre-political condition the state of nature. Just this idea that there's no government, no civil society. Theoretical construct. The solution to this state of nature was the social compact, sometimes called social contract, whereby a group of individuals voluntarily agree to establish society and form a government for the purpose of securing their natural rights. The social compact must rest on consent and conform to the principle that all men are created equal. Importantly, it delineates the ground for political obligation in a natural rights republic. In his essay, Sovereignty, James Madison notes that there are two stages to the social compact. The first stage is the formation of one political society, and it requires unanimous consent. The idea, everybody consents. Okay, we're going to get out of this state of nature and form a civil society. Unanimous consent. You don't have to join, but if you do, you join by consent. The second stage of the compact supposes that the will of the majority must act as a substitute for the unanimous consent of the whole. Okay. After that, you need the rule of the majority, because you can't ever expect unanimous consent. Okay, so I want to read this quote from Jefferson. Whenever the hypothesis of the origin of the lex maioris partis, it's just the principle of majority rule, it is evident that it operates as a plenary substitute for the will of the majority of the society. For the will of the whole society. And that the sovereignty of the society as vested in is exercisable by the majority may do anything that could rightfully done by the unanimous concurrence of the members, the reserved rights of the individuals of conscience, and that sovereignty of the, I think this is a little bit off here, by the majority may do anything that could be rightfully done by unanimous concurrence of the members, the reserved rights of the individuals of conscience, for example, in becoming parties to the original compact being beyond the legitimate reach of sovereignty wherever vested or however viewed. Whew. Okay, why am I putting you through all of that? Okay, here's the key point. For our purposes, it is particularly important to note that Madison contends majorities can only do what can be done by unanimous consent. So a majority could only do what could be done unanimously if everyone consented to it. But even more importantly, he makes clear that there are things that could not be, and he italicizes it, rightfully done even by unanimous consent of the people. Okay? There are, for example, certain reserved rights which cannot be forfeited under any circumstances. The only rights specifically mentioned by Madison are the rights to conscience, which of course means especially the right to religious liberty. So are we clear what Madison is saying here? Madison is saying, even if everybody in the whole political community was a Baptist, a Catholic, an Adventist, it would be wrong to establish a church, okay? Because of this right to conscience, okay? You can never give it up, even if it is unanimous that people want it, okay? So this is just how significant the right to religious liberty and conscience is. Although there was considerable controversy concerning freedom of religion and separation of church and state during the founding era, no founder denied that religious freedom was a natural right. The most authoritative and influential statements on the right to conscience are found in the writings of Jefferson and Madison. Alonzo T. Jones, keep going back to him, argued that Madison's memorial and remonstrance on the subject of religious rights holds the same high place as does the Declaration of Independence on the subjects of rights in general. In this essay, Madison gave two reasons why religious liberty is unalienable natural right. First, I quote, because the opinions of men, depending only on the evidence contemplated by their own minds, cannot follow the dictates of other men. Similarly, Thomas Jefferson declared, and I quote, Almighty God hath created the mind free, and therefore all men shall be free to profess by argument to maintain their opinions in matters of religion. For both Madison and Jefferson, we have a right to our opinions because, unlike physical acts of the bodies, opinions cannot be controlled by the will. No one else can think our thoughts for us, and we cannot force our minds to accept as true what we believe to be false. As matters of faith, religious opinions were a particular concern to the founders because it is often impossible to rationally verify such opinions conform to reality. Thus, the right to religious liberty is unalienable because many beliefs, right, are obligations to God, the first table of the Decalogue, right, as opposed to our obligations to other human beings, have to be a matter of faith. They cannot be confirmed by reason. Our obligations to other human beings, the founders would argue, okay, these are part of the natural law. We can understand them through unassisted human reason, but not our obligations. And so reason tells us we must have religious liberty. And Madison in Memorial and Remonstrance, he writes, this is the second reason religious liberty is unalienable, because what is here a right towards man is a duty towards the Creator. It is the duty of every man to render to the Creator such homage and such only as he believes acceptable to him. This duty is precedent both in order of time and degree of obligation to the claims of civil society. Before any man can be considered a member of civil society, he must be considered a subject of the governor of the universe. Madison believed that man's duty to God is prior to and more important than any obligation owed to civil society. When this argument is combined with the belief that the sort of homage that man renders to God is a matter of faith, one must conclude that just government requires the disestablishment of religion. Indeed, the recognition of the rights of conscience is a necessary precondition for constitutional democracy. For as we have previously noted, majorities must rule, and they are authorized to exercise only what the Declaration calls the just powers of government. By the same token, minorities must accept majority rule. However, no minority could ever be accepted to acquiesce to the will of the majority on religious questions. Common citizenship is impossible when sectarian religious passions animate political discourse. Yet common citizenship requires a common morality. The laws of nature and nature's God provided Americans with a rational, non-arbitrary standard of morality that allowed them to transcend their theological differences. In short, religious liberty, as understood by the American founders, promotes both individual freedom and the political obligation because it is supported by a moral law which does not call into question the theological differences of sectarian religious groups. This is why A.T. Jones stated that the Declaration of Independence announces the perfect principle of civil government. Okay, I've tried to show the importance of the Declaration to our nation, the world, and our church. And I would add that at one time the Declaration was important to most Americans, but I know of no other Christian denomination where the Declaration played as meaningful a role as in our church. What is perhaps most significant for us today is to understand how an earlier generation of Seventh-day Adventists understood the relationship between the Constitution and the principles of the Declaration. This is because our understanding of the Constitution and its principles has changed. Today, because our understanding of today, most legal scholars defend the idea of the living Constitution. It evolves over time, keeping pace with the advance of new ideas. The Declaration is an old idea. We need to keep pace with new ideas. And if you go to law school and you take a class in constitutional law, you will almost certainly be taught that this is how you should interpret the Constitution. On the other side of the contemporary constitutional debate are those constitutional scholars and judges who favor a jurisprudence of original intent, which denies that rights rest on any idea of natural justice, and views the Constitution as a strictly positivist document devoid of any moral foundation besides the will of the people. Progressive and conservative constitutional scholars disagree about the principles of constitutional interpretation. However, contemporary scholars and judges from both camps reject the idea that the principles of the Declaration supply a source for interpreting the Constitution. But if our Adventist pioneers were correct, the principles of the Declaration might still be critical for understanding the foundations of religious liberty and fighting against all forms of despotism. I, for one, believe it is crucial for the Church to recover an authentic Adventist understanding of religious liberty and constitutional interpretation, and that will be the subject I take up this afternoon, if anyone is interested.